Hey guys, hope you're doing well. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to change the subject of the formula. Now, Kevin, what does that even mean, my bro? Well, good question. So let's say, for example, we have the formula A, or actually it's on the next slide. Let's have a look here. So here we've got a formula that we commonly use for things like rectangles, where you've got a length and you've got a breadth. And to find the area, we've learned in previous grades that to find the area of a rectangle, you just multiply the length by the breadth. By the way, let me explain what area actually is. So let's say, well, I'll give you a nice way to think about this. Let's say there is let's say this is like some box or whatever, and we're looking at it from the top view, and let's say there are a whole bunch of glass Coke bottles, for example. Okay, so this is the top view of that. So let's say we've got 3 per column, and let's say we have a total of 6 columns, or 3 rows and 6 columns, and these are all Coke bottles, but you're looking at it from the top. Okay, so if you had to count how many Coke bottles there are, you would see that there's 18, but a faster way to do that is just to say that there's 3 here, 6 over here, and when you multiply 3 by 6, it gives you the answer for all of that. Okay, so that is what area actually is. It just tells you how much area is being covered, or how many Coke bottles there would be, for example. Okay, so now if we have a formula A equals to L times B, we need to be able to use that formula in different ways. For example, maybe they give you the area and they give you the breadth, but then you need to be able to find the length. So let's say, for example, area, well, let me actually just show you here. To get this part by itself, so if we write A equals to LB, you got to think about how to get rid of this b. So if you've watched the lesson where we spoke about equations, whenever we have something like 4, or let's say 4x equals 12, to get this x by itself, you divide by 4, and what you do to the one side, you have to do to the other side. So to get this L by itself, you would divide by b, but what you do on the left, you do on the right, or what you do on the right, you do on the left, and over here, the b's would cancel. They be cancelling. And then so you end up with A over B. So that means if you have the area and you have the breadth, then you are able to calculate the length. Now let's go back to the original formula, and let's say you would like to calculate the breadth. Okay, so if this is the one that you want to calculate, then you need to get rid of this length. So to do that, you divide by the length, but what you do on the right, you do on the left. And so over here, the lengths would cancel out. And so you end up with B equals to A over L. Now let's use that formula and actually do some examples. And then in the rest of this lesson, I'm going to be showing you many types of formulas, such as for the area of a circle, the area of a triangle. And I'm also going to be showing you a formula that switches between Celsius, which we use to measure temperature, and Fahrenheit, which is what they use to measure temperature in other places like America, for example. I'm going to show you a formula that switches between those two. Okay, so let's practice this formula. It says that the area of a rectangle is given with this formula over here. Now it says determine the length, which is L, if the area, which is A, is 10 and the breadth is 5. Okay, so what we'll do is you can say, you can do it in 2 different ways. You could either switch the formula around first. So we are trying to find, determine the length. Okay, so we want to find length. So to do that, you need to get rid of the breadth. So you divide by b on both sides. Then you see how that cancels. And so you end up with length equals to a over b. Now you can go and fill in the values. So they told us that the area is 10 and the breadth is 5. 10 divided by 5 is 2, and length would be measured in meters because these are also in meters. Okay, this one's in meters squared because that's area. Now the other way to do it is to start at the original formula and then to go plug in the numbers. So area is 10, length is what we're trying to find, and breadth is 5. Okay, so then we divide both sides by 5 so that we can get rid of it over there, and so length will be equal to 10 divided by 5, which is going to be 2 meters. Okay, so for the rest of the lesson I'm going to use this one where I first move the letters around and then I put the numbers in. Ooh, here we go. Pi r squared. Whenever you see the word or the symbol pi, I want you to think of a pie that you would maybe eat. Now just imagine that the pie is nice and round, and so whenever you see pi, I want you to think about circles. Pi only works with circles. You don't use pi for triangles, squares, rectangles. It doesn't work. It's only for circles. Okay, so we know that the A stands for area. Pi is it's actually just a number. You might have heard your teacher say 3.14, and then it has a whole bunch of more decimals, but pi is actually just a number. Okay, and then R stands for radius. You might have heard radius and diameter. Let me quickly remind you what those are. So if you have a circle, then if you have the point in the middle, to go from the middle to the outside, that is called radius. Okay, if you go all the way, if you go all the way from one side through the center to the other side, then it's called a diameter. Okay, diameter. So to use this formula, let's say for example we want to find R. Now this is a really good one, so make sure you understand this, okay? They can't ask you to find pi because we know what pi is. It's 3.14. So they could only ask you to find A or R. So let's quickly show you how this works. This is the most challenging one that we have. So we need to let's first try get this part by itself, okay? So we need to get rid of the pi. So the way that you do that is you would divide by pi, but what you do on the one side, you have to do on the other side. So the reason that we do that is so that these pi's can cancel, and so now we end up with A over pi equals to R squared. Now, we haven't spoken about this yet, okay? We've spoken about in previous lessons when we looked at equations, we have spoken about things such as if you have, for example, x plus 3 equals to 6, or let's say equals to 7, then to get this x by itself, we needed to take this 3 away. And so what we then did is we always did the opposite. So if this was a plus 3, then the opposite of that is minus 3, because that'll cancel it out. And then you have to do the same on the other side, like that. And so here it cancels out, which is what we wanted to do. And so x is equal to 4. So when we had a plus here, then we used a minus on the other side. Okay. Now, when we looked at things like 2x equals to 8, now these two are being multiplied, so the opposite of that is divide. So you would divide both sides by 2, because what you do on the one side, you do on the other side, so that over here it would cancel, and so you'd end up with x is equal to 8 divided by 2, which is 4. Okay, now we've also looked at situations where you have something like x over 3 equals to 7. So here they are dividing. Okay, now we've learned that the opposite of dividing is going to be multiplying. So what we would do here to get x by itself is you would multiply by 3, and then what you do to the one side, you do to the other side, because 3 at the top, 3 at the bottom and 3 at the top, they would cancel each other. And so x would be 7 times 3, which is 21. So then when you multiply, then we rather use divide. And when we had a multiply, then we rather divide. You see, so multiply goes with divide, and plus goes with minus, like we saw over here. But we've never looked at something that has a power of 2. So the opposite of a power is a root. Now, what is a root? A root is this thing over here. So if you have, for example, something to the power of 3, then the opposite of that is a root with a 3. If you have something to the power of 5, then the opposite of that is going to be a root with a 5. If you have something to the power of 2, then the root would have to have a 2, but don't put a 2 there. When you see a root like this, it automatically actually has a 2 over there. That is the default, is a 2, okay? So when you see this on your calculator, it is using the one that has a 2, so you don't have to go write that in. So the opposite of this is a 2. So what we will do is we will put a square root on both sides. What happens is that this square root cancels this number out. And so you just end up with an R. And then on the left, you just leave this like that, with the a and the pi inside the root, okay? It's like putting a big box right over all of that. Now let's go use that formula and actually practice it now. They tell us that the area of a circle is given as that, so that formula we've already learnt about. Now it says determine R if the area is 20, and then you can use pi as 3.14. So we know now that this is the formula. Now to get R by itself, you first need to get rid of pi, so you divide this side by pi, and you divide this side by pi. Now some of you are like, Kevin, why aren't you using 3.14? Don't worry, I'm going to in a few moments. I'm just first getting my formula. So these pi's are going to cancel, and so you end up with that over there. Then what we've learned is that to get rid of this, you have to use the square root. So we have to do what you do to the one side, you have to do to the other side. And so this square root completely cancels that too. And so you'll just be left with the R, and then I'm going to change pi to 3.14. Now the pi is also, the 3.14 is also inside the root, okay? And so we end up now with the following. Area is 20 divided by 3.14. Go ahead, type that on the calculator, and let's round to 2 decimal places. So that would be 2.52. Now I haven't given you any specific units, but if I had meters squared over here, then you could say meters, for example. If I had centimeters, then you could say centimeters. So for now, I'm just going to leave it out. If you wanted to, you could say units or something like that. But yeah, that's how you would use this formula. That's the most challenging formula. If they ever ask you to find the diameter, just remember that the diameter is always all the way across. That's diameter. And then radius is always halfway. So if they ask you to calculate the diameter, you can just go calculate the radius first, and then just multiply that answer by 2, because that's then the diameter. Alright, now here we have this formula. Now this formula is for triangles, and I'm not going to really go show you all the things about triangles right now, but all we need to know is that the B stands for base, and the H stands for height. So for example, if you have a triangle, I said I wasn't going to show you, but I cannot resist. This is the base, for example, and this is the height. There's different ways of doing these things. Like you could even say that this is the base and this is the height. It doesn't really matter, to be honest, because here I could actually just take that triangle and I could just turn it upwards on its side, and then you could see that this side is now there and this side is now there. So it doesn't really matter which one's the base and which one's the height. So you could say then base and height. Doesn't really matter. Okay, so, and then A stands for area, and then this is just a half. Okay, so you might, I think for this next part, it's going to be better for you to rather write it like this. If you have a half in the front, that is the same as saying 1 BH over 2. That is the same thing. But now putting a 1 in the front doesn't do anything, so you could actually just write it like this. That is going to make your life so much easier for these next parts. So let's say you want to calculate the base, which is B. So you've learned how to, so for example, how would you get rid of this? Well, remember, this is a divide sign. So the opposite of a divide would be a multiply. So you would multiply by 2, but what you do on the one side, you must also do on the other side. Because that 2 at the bottom and that 2 at the top would now cancel. And so you end up with 2a. A times 2 and 2 times A is the same thing. And then on the right hand side, you're still going to be left with B and H. Now, how would you get rid of H? Well, then you would divide. Okay? But what you do to the one side, you have to do to the other side. Let's do it in a different color. And so these H's would cancel. And so you're going to be left with B is equal to 2A over H. Okay, so that's a formula that you could use. And we're going to look at an example just now. And then towards the end of this lesson, we're going to also be looking at this weird formula, which is what they use to convert Celsius and Fahrenheit. Okay, so let's quickly see how this would work if we now wanted to calculate for H. We're going to do exactly the same thing, actually. So you remember you can write the formula as BH over 2. And so you could get rid of the, so now we're trying to find H, right? So that's the one we're trying to find. So you eventually need to get this B and this 2 away. You can do whichever one you want first. It doesn't really matter. But let's get rid of the 2. So this 2 is at the bottom, so we need to add a 2 at the top, so we multiply, and what you do on the one side, you do to the other side, and so that's going to leave you with 2a on the left, and bh on the right, because these 2's have cancelled. Now we're trying to get h by itself, so we need to get the b away, so you divide, let's do it in a different color, so you divide by b, and what you do to the one side, you have to do to the other side. So these b's are now going to cancel, and so you end up with h is equal to 2a over b. So you see how the formulas are pretty much the same. The ones that it's just the h and the b that have switched around. So let's use that in an example now. So I'm not going to go do all the changing it all around. We've just learned that we should be able to get to that formula if we need to find base, and we should be able to get to this formula if we need to find height. I wouldn't say you should memorize these. You should just know that when they give you this formula in a test, you need to just remember how to get it to here or get it to there. Okay, otherwise it's just too much for you to remember. Okay, I see I made a bit of a mistake here. The length height. It says determine the height if the area is 10 and the base is 4. Okay, so they want us to find the height. So we're going to use this formula. So 2a over b is equal to height. And so 2a, so a is 10, so you just put a 10 there. B is 4, and if you had to go calculate this, it will be 20. Well, let's say that that's equal to h, and then you can say 20 over 4, and then 20 over 4 is equal to 5, and then you'll just say 5 meters, because you can see that they're using meters. This one just has a meter squared because that's area. Okay, we're nearly done, guys. To measure temperature, in many parts of the world, we use Celsius, but in some parts of the world, especially in like America, they use Fahrenheit. And we need to know how to switch this around. The first thing I would tell you to do is to write it in a different way. You know, for example, when I showed you this formula, what did we suggest that we do? We said we put the 1 at the top, and then the 2 at the bottom, and then a 1 doesn't really need to be there. And this is easier to work with, because then you have a top and a bottom. This 5 over 9, we're going to do the same. So we're going to write it like this. We're going to say 5 brackets Fahrenheit minus 32 over 9. So now we have a top and a bottom. It just makes it easier to work with. It's exactly the same thing. Okay, so let's say, for example, now this is quite interesting. Let's say, for example, okay, there's only 2 things I would ask you for. They're not going to ask you to get the 5 by itself, because that's 5. They're not going to ask you to get 32, and they're not going to ask you to get the 9. They're either going to ask you to get Celsius or Fahrenheit. So let's get let me show you what to do. So you see, we're trying to get Fahrenheit, okay? So the first thing you need to move away is either this 9 or this 5. The negative 32 also needs to move, but it cannot move right now. We're going to leave whatever's here by itself. Okay, so let's take the 9. Now we should be getting quite comfortable with this by now. So because it's at the bottom, you're going to multiply 9 at the top, and what you do to the one side, you have to do to the other side. Let's write that a bit better. Okay, so on the left, we can just write that as 9c. On the right, we have a 5. We still have the brackets. That hasn't changed. But the 9 has disappeared. The next thing is to get rid of the 5. So we can just divide this side by 5. But what you do to the one side, you have to do to the other side. And the reason I did that is so that these 5s can cancel. So now we have 9c, or Celsius, over 5 equals to bracket f minus 32. Now, because there's nothing in front of the bracket anymore and there's nothing underneath the bracket, we can actually just get rid of it. There we go. Now be careful, don't divide by 32. Think about what we did when we looked at equations. If you have something like x minus 3 equals to 7, how would you get rid of that? Well, you would add a plus 3. This is not the same as this. It's not the same, okay? So to get rid of that minus 32, you're going to say plus 32. So what you do to the one side, you have to do to the other side. And now, see on the left, you just end up with now this plus 32 isn't going to go up there. No, it stands by itself. So it's going to be 9c over 5 plus 32, like that, equals to f. Because this negative 32 and this plus 32, they cancel out. And so there is the formula that we would use. You could also write it from left to right if you wanted to. So it's 9c over 5 plus 32. Now we're going to use that formula. So let's just write that out. F is equal to 9c over 5 plus 32. So it says, well, the first question says, determine the Celsius temperature. Okay, so use this one if the Fahrenheit temperature is 50. So all that you do is you're just going to substitute 50 over there. So that would be, so you're not going to use this formula right now. They're not asking you for Fahrenheit. So the Celsius temperature would then be 5 over 9, and then in brackets, 50 minus 32. And so that's going to be 5 over 9. Now 50 minus 32 is 18. And then this you could just put on your calculator. And I don't know why I put the dot there. And then the Celsius temperature would be 10 degrees. Okay, now that's question A. Now for question B, it says determine the Fahrenheit temperature. So we're going to use this formula now. If the Celsius is 30, so you're going to put the Celsius over there. So you're going to say F equals to 9. Now this is going to be a multiply by 30, and then the plus 32 is by itself. So if you had to go work all of that out, you would get 86 degrees.